Jason Moran. Professor? You get called a professor here, or
Not a professor. But it's great that that we're here together, as we have been together for many years talking about music as friends, as fellow pianists, and now we're working in the same city for the future of the music, for the good of the future of the music, but also to listen to some pianists, but also to make some music together, and also have a conversation about our various practices and the things that we hear in each other's practice. And so it's mostly informal, but we will take questions if people ever get confused. And but maybe you want to play? You want to play?
Sure, let's play. You want to play? Yeah.
So I think many of how I spent a lot of the time when I left Houston and went to Manhattan School of Music was spent in a situation very similar to this. As a pianist, studying with another pianist, and the requirement of a pianist to learn how to play with another pianist, which is rare.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very rare thing. But it was a thing over those years that I've figured out kind of how to do, and over the years have continued to figure out how to do as each situation is different. Vijay has a great duo with Craig Taborn, which is pretty also hands-on kind of player. And over the years, I mean, who else have you played duets with?
Amina Claudine Myers.
Right.
James Hurt.
Right.
Andy Milne. I don't know. I remember seeing you play with Andrew Hill.
Right.
One time at American Hall.
Right.
Yeah, it's a special and challenging thing. The approach that Craig and I have taken over the years is really approach it like we're constructing together, rather than treating it like we're taking turns soloing and riffing and things like that. It's really more like, it might for a moment sound like one person or like more than two people. You know, that the sense it's not really about functioning soloistically or as a sort of unified self. I guess that's the way to see it. But this kind of came about with Craig and me specifically. We got to work together for some years in Roscoe Mitchell's ensemble, the Note Factory, which is like the title suggests. It's pretty active, a lot of intricate maneuvering. And one of the directives that was that Roscoe would bring to the table was that especially in a group improvisation, that you're not following each other in the sort of like typical sense of like playing someone's stuff back at them, like, oh, I heard you, I'm gonna riff on what you just played, and kind of, because that principle would sort of bog things down, or too much energy would be focused around one idea, you know, and it wouldn't, especially when you have a large ensemble where people are interacting dynamically. If things kind of build up around one idea, then it sort of it creates an imbalance, I guess, but basically how it is. So we learned a lot about how to work together in that context, of like actually a principle of avoidance, which is still co-constructive in the sense that we're still building something together, but sort of by doing opposite things often. But then other times we would, as a duo specifically, we would find ourselves just starting in the exact same place somehow, and then just sort of stay there. So then it's sort of like almost like a miniature, like micro version of the duo. So I guess what comes out in all of those sort of tactics is trying to undo our assumptions about how you're supposed to function in an ensemble. You know, and this is something I try to work on in my trio too, is sort of a non-soloistic way of improvising together, that where we can kind of build something together. You know, see what kind of other constructions come about that way. And it's basically a rhythm section mentality. It's sort of like a rhythm section player's mentality, because you know, in the rhythm section you're always improvising anyway. Even if you're playing a song, every sound you make is a choice, and you're making choices relationally and with regard to what everyone else is doing. So that's sort of that mentality.
There was I don't even know if he's here. I mean, just left a lesson with the bassist, and we were talking about the function, you know, the possibilities of being in a rhythm section as a bassist, and I said, do you feel like you have to keep the beat? He was like, yeah, I feel like I do. I said, you know, I have time too. I can also keep the beat, as can the drummer, as can the saxophonist. I was like, it's a shared responsibility. Somehow, I think, which is interesting for us to note, those of you who are like in the forest right now, hacking away, trying to make space before the stuff covers you up again. But as you hack away, you know, keep hacking, and until you've made a space for yourself to actually like contemplate what's around you. And sometimes the hacking has to stop because the plant's gonna die on its own. But if every time you feel like my sole function is to stay here, then I think what it doesn't allow is it doesn't allow us to hear the space that you occupy. Like if you leave it alone and leave the space there, then people will maybe listen to you more. If you're always playing all of the time, then I might listen to you less. You know, and so how do we figure out that balance? You know, and especially in different kinds of music, it functions different ways. You know, in situations that we're accustomed to, it's okay to leave the space. It's really okay because the world will not end. And I think sometimes students think that the world is going to end. You know, or, I mean, to be honest, I think it's more about ridicule. It's ridicule from your fellow classmate. Like, well, why did you do that? You know, when they're no better a player than you. But, you know, like, there's a lot of ridicule that goes in and among our circles that I think actually dampens the ability to actually be constructive, creative players. Just ridicule alone. It's not shy because you're shy about the idea. It's shy of the reaction it's going to cause from your fellow bandmates, you know. And I think I'm positive. I have my stories of when people have responded to me overtly, you know, like, you know, and it does feel like, ooh, it's not the best feeling, but like, how do you move from that time, you know, of without feeling shame for your idea?
To me, it's about the way you get past that is actually listening beyond that frame, listening to the audience. And that's sort of what, you know, both you and I have benefited from apprenticeship, you know, where it's not just about what musicians think about it. Who cares what musicians think? It's actually about how the ideas work in reality, you know, like in the context of an audience where you're trying to communicate something. And that's where you really learn. And that's what I've learned the most from playing with elders like Roscoe, like Steve Coleman, Amir Baraka, Butch Morris, you know, Wadad Alio Smith, is about how to really respond to the moment, respond to even moments of what feel like failure, or a sense of like when the music breaks, how do you fix it in real time, like really in the moment where you don't have a choice, you can't just start over, you actually have to pick it up and keep going. Those kinds of choices, observing elders in that kind of context where they teach you how to pick up the pieces, or how to kind of like actually deal with what is at hand and make something out of it. That's sort of like, to me, where the ideas have the most impact is in that context. And I think, you know, the thing about music school is that we don't get access to audiences. That's the hardest thing about it, really. That's the main thing that is very hard to simulate. We can't simulate it amongst ourselves. You know?
Do you all get to play for audiences frequently, other than your family? Like, I didn't get that. I mean, I didn't get it a lot, you know, while I was in school. And I do, this is a side note of how much of a jerk I am sometimes, but I remember playing in a place it used to be called West End Cafe right on Broadway. Anyway, it was a place near Manhattan School of Music, and I was playing with some friends there. It was their gig. And it was this slow ballad, and I thought, you know, and I was really trying to take my time and make the best choices, you know, with the sound. And there was a table of people just like enjoying themselves, but enjoying themselves. Right. They weren't enjoying the music. Maybe they were enjoying the music, but so much so that they wanted to be so loud. And now I don't care. You can talk however loud you want to at my show. I don't care. But when I was 20 and 19, I did care because it was so quiet, and I kept getting distracted, you know, when I wanted to play a note, and and they were telling jokes, and I slammed the lid down, and I stood up, and I'm from Texas, and my father's vulgar, and I said, "Will you shut up?" And then expletive, and it was like it was part of my solo, like, you know. because it went like,
Transcribe
shoop,
that.
you know, like it was so quiet, and I sat back down and then like tried to insert myself back into the sensitive ballad. It was very difficult, you know, but like, like real life situations of us playing music, and every one of us who are musicians has a story about being in an audience or being on stage and experiencing an audience in a way where we have to you have to really be. I remember talking to Andrew Hill about that feeling, and I was asking him, you know, when he plays a solo concert, how would he think about it? He said, I only respond to the audience's energy.
Yeah. He said that to me too, yeah.
You know, like that's like you know, I don't do that when I do my solo shows. I mean, I do, but like, man, like really, like you walk into a room, you sit at your piano, and you might glance at your audience, and you get a sense of them, and then you decide what to play.
That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. You ever deal with a heckler?
Yeah, but I'm pretty witty.
Oh, okay.
And I have a microphone, and I do like to curse, like I said. I mean, it's very rare though. No heckler, not like like comedians who deal with hecklers. That's Have you dealt with a heckler?
There was one time I can remember about 20 years ago, I was playing with an early version of my trio. And we had a piece that was just deliberately like, basically a chant. Like we just played this loop kind of forever. And it was meant to sort of be like a little bit disruptive in the sense that eventually someone's going to say, well, this is not music.
Yes.
That was basically the intent, so it was kind of provocative to begin with, and it happened. It worked, basically. This guy starts saying, we heard it!
Oh, that's great. That's
My poor bandmates, they were more traumatized than I was. I was just sticking to my guns. So the bass player was, because we had just made our CD, it was our first album, which was in '95, and the bass player like tried to like go up and confront this guy. He's like, you know, we have a CD out. And the guy's like, you know, it was funny. The guy's like, oh, what did he say? He said, I hope that somebody besides your immediate relatives buys this CD. So, and, we all hope that. Anyway, it's like do or die moments like that that actually teach you more about music than we'll ever learn at New England Conservatory or in any conservatory or inside of any room. Because music is about communication, that's what it's for. It's a basic fact. That wasn't meant to be anything revelatory or deep, but it's just a fact.
Yeah. Now, how do you deal with you function in a lot of different contexts over the years, and considering, let's say, considering you 20 years ago when you made your first CD, right? The context you imagined for your music then versus the context you imagine for your music now.
Well, you know, back then I didn't imagine that it would go anywhere, actually. It was almost like I thought it would be my last album. It was, you know, I was 23, 1995, and I sort of just put everything in it because I figured I'd never get to do this again. So I brought all my friends, and we had like 5 different bands on one album and stuff like that. And I wrote these really long, dense liner notes, very wordy. So it's sort of like, this is my message to the world, because I might never get to make another thing like this. And so now I've kind of been able to observe that cycle a few, 20 times basically, and see how things work. And I can basically treat each album more like, okay, this is one facet, and inside of that, it will have its own kind of priorities, but it's not going to express the totality of who I am or who anybody is, and that's okay. And so sort of bound up with that is like question of the audience. But I guess for an artist, it's never useful to think in terms of limiting your audience from the beginning. Like you actually want to just push it out into the world and see what happens. Like does anybody listen? Who listens? Why? What did they hear? How? How did they respond? That's the sort of process that's very open-ended. And I guess what I've found, in a way that I never never imagined is that people listen. I never realized that, I never imagined myself in this position where people would actually wait for my album and then buy it and listen to it. So that's a kind of a blessing. It's not just kind of a blessing, it's a huge blessing. It's a huge responsibility is how I see it. It's sort of like, okay, so I have to take care of the listener.
Mm.
So that's sort of how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, I wanted to ask you a similar question, but I guess it's, you know, part of what enlivens a lot of your work is that it reaches outside of music.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it very directly sourcing visual artists and concepts that are beyond pure aesthetics, you could say, beyond just form, beyond just the nuts and bolts of putting notes together. And that seems to be your way of sort of hearing beyond the, what'd you call it? Fellow musicians' critiques? What's the word you used?
I don't know.
Just a few minutes ago. Anyway, the way musicians will kind of be hard.
Ridicule.
Ridicule.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, well.
So how you hear beyond ridicule by actually listening beyond
Yeah.
music is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
kind of, that's what's really been inspiring to me about your overall life project, I guess I could say.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You know, because I felt like while I was at Manhattan School of Music studying music, there was only one class about the other art forms, and it was only it was only like one semester long.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, this is a disservice to what each of the students could possibly learn about other forms,
Yeah.
about choreography, about poetry, about visual art, you know, fine art, you know, about sculpture, you know, about architecture, like all of that.
Mhm.
And where music fits in all those cultures and societies.
Mhm.
You know, generally we think of music, I say generally we, and I'm meaning us in conservatory world, we think of music that happens like on a stage for an audience,
Yeah.
you know, in a room,
Right.
you know, and that's okay. That's okay. But you hear more music in an elevator than you do in a concert hall, you know, or in a mall. You know, I mean, you know, like it's
Yeah.
also everywhere else
Yes.
at the exact same time.
Yeah.
And hitting people in different ways rather than focused attention is kind of like subconscious, you know. And just over the years, I just knew that if I kept, I mean, as much as I love the music that we both study, that wasn't the end of it. Whether it's, you know, falling in love with a filmmaker, you know, or falling in love with an artist and their work. And then I always felt like there should be like a class that's devoted to simply application. Application of ideas that don't seemingly relate, but then how do you put them together in your form?
Yes.
Like there should be an entire year-long class that just is about trying to figure out where is the relationships,
Right.
you know? And from the people that I think we know, we see it so frequently done,
Yeah.
but so little taught. You know, so little of it is actually taught in the classroom. And so I always considered myself like a student of all those, the people that we get to work with and hang out with, mostly to just see how Henry Threadgill, how he talks about hearing funeral bands in Sicily,
Right.
and then how he makes his music from Chicago for those parade bands.
Yes.
You know, like, so him putting that all together, you know, and then getting out and playing parades. You know, like, okay, or, you know, then his idea that he talked about the other day, which was, oh, you know, I wanted to make a service for all the funeral parlors, that I had all these bands that go play funeral parlors. Like death and music.
Yes.
Death and music.
It's a different kind of functionality.
Yeah. What song do your family want to hear to celebrate your life?
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I kind of have some songs in my head that I would like to hear, or songs I would like to play for someone when they were gone, you know?
Did you ever have to do that?
Yeah.
Play at a memorial service?
My mother. It was the hardest thing, you know?
Yeah.
The hardest thing to ever do. Never will do it again. Not for I'll do it for my father, but I can't play nobody else's stuff. It's just tough, you know? And that's music. That's music you still learn in this school, but how it functions is not like, you know, I'm going to give you another gig because of how great you played. Nah, that is not about that at all. And most of the time, I feel like actually music is more for that than it is for like to be in the jazz publications. You know?
Right. No, it's about an emotional connection and emotional catharsis.
Yeah.
I had to play at a memorial service for somebody once, and it was actually he had died 10 years earlier. So it was a bunch of his old friends gathered and just sitting silently in a room, and they just wanted some piano. And then it's really about helping everybody, and in fact, helping by doing it yourself, summoning it in yourself. It's like method acting or something. Like actually, kind of, you have to feel these things, which basically means being vulnerable, completely vulnerable, to the point where you might lose it yourself, you know. But really guiding everybody through an emotional experience together. Yeah, and experiences like that teach me more about music, what it really does. I mean, I remember when I got to do my first solo tour, which was like, I was terrified about, because I had playing solo concerts for rooms full of strangers, like night after night, is, as you know, is like, that's a challenge, you know, because there's nothing to play off of except your own self, and then all of them who are, you know, who are they? You don't know who they are or where they're coming from. So summoning that energy and like digging into that electricity that's in the air and like really channeling it and opening yourself to it to the point of really like, to the point of the possibility of failure, you know? It's bringing yourself to that extremely vulnerable space where you are kind of a transformer for all the emotions in the room. That is sort of more those kinds of experiences are more useful than any kind of notion of excellence or perfection or brilliance or genius. I wasn't going to use that word, but you know, it just sort of puts you in that place where you have a responsibility to uphold for others. You know?
So that's your responsibility, you all. Any questions before we start inviting pianists up to play their emotions of the room? Yeah.
Well, first of all, thanks for sharing all this information. My question is for Vijay. I was wondering how would you come up with a music for it? Like, how do you choose a repertoire for the trio? Starting out. And especially like three questions. So the first, like, how do you choose the tunes? And if you like do like a naturally wave songs that are like ordinary, and from artists that are like still like for instance, Stevie Wonder or Flying Lotus, if there's like any relationship in the audience that you want to reach, and the tunes that you choose to record. Is that clear?
Yeah. Did everybody hear the question? Basically. He asked about how I choose repertoire for my trio and if there's any sort of specific agenda in trying to reach specific sectors of the audience or something in those particular choices I make. Like he was referring to some albums of mine where I played a Stevie Wonder song or a Flying Lotus song. You know, well, I think if we looked on anyone's iPod in this room, we'd see a pretty broad spectrum of stuff, right? And we're musicians, but even if you stepped out into the street or to Boston College or to Harvard or MIT, you'd have the same experience where if you look on someone's iPod, you might see, you know, Taylor Swift and Kanye and Beethoven and Radiohead and so on. Like you'll actually see a huge, and that's basically what we all are, you know? So I'm just kind of open to that. I don't really feel like but then I also want to say that the history of this music is that. When we think about, like a great example is My Favorite Things. Do you guys know what the #1 record on the Billboard charts in 1960 was? It was the Broadway cast recording of The Sound of Music. That's the year that Coltrane recorded My Favorite Things. He actually took it from, it was a hit. It was a hit song that he recast. And that, now we think of that as a sort of like structural detonation in the history of jazz or something like, right? But it was that, but it was also very much in keeping with the history of people taking, basically using a found text like that and kind of transforming it, turning it into something it isn't or was never meant for, and telling a different story with it. So that to me is kind of, that's just the nature of this music. It's the history. It's right there everywhere you look. So I guess I just sort of reach into what music is meaningful to me and see if we can make something out of it. Sometimes I try to set a challenge for ourselves, like, okay, well, here's a piece that we will never sound like, no matter how hard we try. So let's try, so let's actually dig into the details of it. Well, why can't we? What's wrong? What is wrong with us that we can't reach that? Let's see if we can orchestrate it. Let's come up with an orchestration that will sound like an analog synth bass, even though none of us are that, so really thinking about texture and sound and stuff and kind of the identity of a song from that perspective. But it all it comes together. Each song is its own story, I guess I could say, in terms of why that one and not another one. I don't know, because we tried that one and it sort of worked, and we tried another one and it didn't work. So that's basically, there's not much more to it than that. We also try to just trust the process, I guess, in the sense that you reach outside of yourself to take on something that's really resistant to that process, and something is born of that isn't either one. It's not you. It's not that, something else. So there's a transformative moment in that process. I guess if you just believe that it will happen and you're patient enough, just wait. We'll sit on one groove for hours, just trying to find it or trying to find something about it. Or we'll do that in performance. Okay, let's see if we can, how deep can we dig into this one rhythm? This one, in the case of Human Nature, for example, we took the open section of our version of it. It's really it took the last turn of the chorus and kind of split that open into this. We basically magnified it or multiplied it. I was thinking about the history of hip hop. There's a great book called Can't Stop, Won't Stop, which is by Jeff Chang. It's a great history of social and cultural and aesthetic history of hip hop. And he talks about DJ Kool Herc. There's interviews with him. Basically, he invented the breakbeat, and the reason he invented it, it was out of necessity. It was really he was DJing. He made his own sound system so he could DJ at parties, and he'd throw parties, just make money and so on. And he'd play a record, and he'd notice that there was a certain moment in every record where everybody wanted to dance. And it's sort of usually this breakdown that happened after the second chorus of a song. That's sort of it'd be 4 or 8 or 16 measures, and that's when everyone would storm the dance floor and try to do their thing. They're that's the moment. So he's well, we need more of that. It's sort of the between part of the song. It's part of the song where sort of nothing is happening, but everything is happening at the same time. It's sort of the space where you can kind of become something right in that moment. So that's what we would do is sort of what he did, which is magnify a moment in the song until it becomes its own universe. Anyway, did that really answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah, just one second. And I know you just went to the studio recently.
Uh-huh.
Did you anticipate some of the stuff you recorded that any music from a different genre than jazz that it's gonna lock in your next week?
What's on the new trio album?
Yeah.
Oh, you want me to spoil the surprise? No, there's no surprise. Actually, we didn't. There's not really any kind of. There are a few covers that I think they're more identifiably jazz songs. There's a Strayhorn piece, there's a Monk tune, there's a Coltrane tune, and then there's a lot of my tunes. That's basically what it is. So I don't know. Other than that, if I could describe it, we wouldn't have had to make it. You know, it's basically its own thing. I don't know what else to do.
You ready to play? You are?
Yeah, but I have a question too. About, you were talking about like going to the audience for feedback. And like you kind of alluded to the sort of like the metaphysical sense of the audience, like the presence of the audience and getting feedback that way. Or I guess like through visual cues, like looking at them. But do you have like any sort of, do either of you suggest or have thought about like getting specific feedback, like via either in a formal way, like via survey, or like just in conversation for your music, instead of just sort of an approximation, but like concrete sort of.
I'll say the Fat Swallow Dance Party is goes in right head first into it. It's like, we're gonna play this. Some of the songs you can get down, you can sit down, and some of these songs I'm gonna ask you to get up and dance. Will you get up and dance with me? I have a mask on. You know, and that's what it's the goal. It's like comedy. You ain't gonna show up to a comedy show. Your comedian wants you to laugh. That's it. So if I want you to dance, that's it. So dance bands, you know, you think about like, you know, going to see like any of these pop groups that can really make people dance, or a song comes on in the club, you go to the club. Song comes on in the club, and it's like, oh man, that's power.
Yeah.
That's power. You might think it's whack music, but it's power though. And they have identified something in people, a certain group of people that want to feel that loud, that makes them want to move in a room that's dark, you know, with a little bit of light. So I mean, for me, the Fat Swallow thing was like, that was the other part of that whole exploration of his music was he played for people to dance. He played socially. It wasn't anywhere else. It was on the ground, in and among the people. That was it. So that's, I mean, and you know, this is like the first time, and this is a scary thing. Pianists, luckily, most times get to face away from the audience and just look at the musicians and the wall,
That's right.
you know? And so sometimes during this show, I turn the rows and I try to place it pretty square in front of the audience and and look at people. Oh, look at them.
That's deep.
I don't know how saxophonists and singers and trumpeters, you know, like who stand in the front line and are so just like, you know, they play and they look out, and they connect, you know. Oh, that's why I put the mask on, man. I put the mask on, and that way I can feel like I'm doing it, but I don't have to do it because it's really a lot. It's really a lot. But I'll say, just to answer the question, that when we performed the show live, we did it here in Boston, and you know, that was a marking point because I totally changed the show after that performance. Because I knew that my energy level wasn't matching the energy level I was trying to get out of an audience member. And so that I knew I had to do more. I had to change my performance. You know, and so that, you know, that's.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess we have to remember where music came from, right? I mean, it came from us. I mean, it came from people. So, and in that sense, it works because it gives people an experience that nothing else like it does. You know, there's nothing else like it. There's nothing else like music. That's why there's music. So to understand in those terms, like there's something about it that's necessary, and that can't be expressed in any other way, and can't even really be talked about in any other way, except through the process of doing it in a room with other people, or just among people, like you said, about vets. Like, I guess. So what I'm saying is, the survey or the sort of after the fact kind of like what people will cognitively write down and say. Like when they think through what they're saying, it's not the same as like just like the gut experience of being in a room together and just like having sound hit you, or being a generator of that sound. It's funny, I played with last spring, I did a concert at Harvard at Sanders Theater. Half of it was with my trio, but the first half was with a poet named Robert Pinsky. And he and I had worked together before, but I wanted to try something a little different, because he has this way of working with jazz musicians, and he calls his thing jazz poetry, and I sort of wanted to disrupt that because it seemed like a habit to me, and I just wanted to do something a little bit more authentic to us, you know. And so I remember when we were rehearsing, he came at me and he's like, so when you want me to come back in, just look at me and I'll come back in. And I said, I don't know when you're supposed to come back in. Why are you asking me when to come in? I mean, plus I play with my eyes closed, so I won't be looking at you. So, and it was, you know, I was gentle, but you know, it was like, it just, to me, it was kind of like unstaging it to the point where you actually just listen and then you feel it. So then right before we went on stage, we had rehearsed a few times, right before we went on stage, I said, man, this is great, but I just had to it took me a lot to get used to working with you. I mean, I'm used to being cued, but with you, I'm just going purely on stomach and balls. And actually, there was something to that has stuck with me. Like we keep kind of, I don't know, it's very dude. It sounds very guy, but like, just the fact that actually a lot of music happens below the shoulders. I'll put it that way. You know, it's not just cerebral. It's actually, it's your body in action, and it's other bodies responding on that level. So actually, you can't really access the experience through any other means. You can't really write about it or check some boxes on a survey. Really, you're not really going to get it.
We don't have like 10 minutes. Maybe we,
One quick piece?
huh?
One short piece?
From who?
I don't know, I mean,
No, we're gonna play again. I wanted to ask if there was any questions because we only have like about 10 minutes left in here. Yes.
Yes.
We're gonna do that though.
There's a question that's kind of been beating at me ever since. You asked about like getting feedback from the audience. I mean, do you think that there's an inherent danger of like being too aware of like your audience's reaction, or do you ever feel like where do you draw the line between responding in an animated way to people that are around you and like holding back?
Oh.
Does it ever happen?
Well, you kind of have to take the long view on these things. I mean, life is long. You know, I mean, you guys are half my age, I think, and I'm half Randy Weston's age, you know? So, like, we've got a lot of time to figure this stuff out. I guess what I would also say is that when I say, like, listen to the audience, I don't mean, like, pandering or just giving them what you think they want. But more like trying to get them involved in what you're doing, to the point that you might actually be able to take them somewhere that they could not have imagined ever going otherwise, you know? So, in other words, it's not about just sort of hurling material at the audience, but it's about kind of getting into it together somehow. Like how do you inaugurate that sense of like we're in this together? How do you set that up? That's the real question. And then how do you respond moment to moment to that feeling? Like I've found, especially playing solo concerts, but actually in general, that eventually I can hear everybody breathing. And there'll be moments when everyone breathes together. You can't imagine that that's possible, but then you hear it happen. It's like, wow, I helped bring that about, you know? That kind of thing is what I'm talking about. It's really, you know, you can't even really put a price tag on it or any kind of label on it or anything. It's just a thing that happens that we're all capable of, that you just want to try to tap into and harness and join in.
Yep.
I was wondering, we talked a lot about piano performances and solo piano performances. Like having a lot of freedom in that setting, obviously, but how you would, or any advice you would give to try and get that same level of freedom, but with like a larger band, or even especially for rhythm sections and like the rest of your trios, so you can, work in a larger setting with more textures, but without limiting yourself. That's what you're doing. And like, are there any things you do with your trios and build that?
It's difficult to answer for me. But hey, I'll try to answer it. But, it's personalities. I mean, I have a vision that if you understand how to work with your instrument in a myriad of ways, you'll always be free. If you know your instrument, so if you know your bass, if you really know it though, then it don't matter who you play with. If you don't because you know, and you know you with your relationship to your bass. You be playing the most difficult music and you still have all the freedom you ever want inside of it, because you know. That's not really an answer, but I believe it wholeheartedly. Only because, I mean, in studying with Jackie Bayard all those years, he just was like, he just planned it, just like, yo, if you know all this stuff I'm talking about, like personally, you know it, not me teaching you, but you know it, then you can play with anybody. And you can do anything in those situations that you think is fit for it. And you make choices about what you think is fit, things that go against the grain, things that go with the grain, and you know how to rub it and not piss anybody off at the same time, and hopefully you'll be in settings where people are supportive of that kind of dialogue, which is actually pretty rare. I think you might more run into that kind of issue, but I'm a firm believer that it's through your own understanding of your music, no matter how large the ensemble is around you, that you'll understand the most if you understand your instrument.
I mean, my experience with bands I've been in, bands I've been a part of, is that we would just try to, time is your ally, really. I mean, time in the sense of like, sit in a room together for 6 hours every day for a week or a few weeks, that kind of time where it's really like, I remember, the original version of Fieldwork, it was me and Aaron Stewart and Elliot Cavey. We used to rehearse in my apartment. This is like in the year 2000. We lived on the ground floor of this apartment, and we would just sit on one rhythm like forever. I mean, the neighbors could hear us, talk about, like, nobody heckled. They should have. But one time there was a guy who worked maintenance in the building, and he sometimes would just sit outside and listen. And like one time we came out of our rehearsal, and he's like, "I heard you all in there. What you looking for?" Which is really, it was really nice.
That's good. That's good. That's
yeah,
good.
but like, we never give ourselves time to even do that. That's the thing. Like, it's about just rehearsing just enough to make the gig or something, and not writing anything too hard because no one wants to rehearse and stuff like that. It's like, just take the time and develop something. It's not going to happen any other way. We used to, I remember there's a phrase that's on Cecil Taylor's liner notes to either Unit Structures or Conquistador, where he was talking about how, he had this band, but they didn't have any gigs. So we had to simulate the progress of a working band. That's what he said. So we'd actually that's why the second Fieldwork album is called Simulated Progress, because it's really basically we did that too. We just got together all day, every day for a long time. That's basically where stuff happens that you can't account for, you can't predict, and there's not really any word for it, It's just that. It grows from the experience. Nowadays, he and I both have the experience, the good fortune to get to tour, and then that's another kind of version of that experience where like night after night you can test drive, and then it's like actually in a context where you're actually bouncing ideas off of an audience. So that's another way that that works. But you have one.
Yeah. I think the hardest thing as a jazz musician is being able to like relate to people who are outside the music. What are some ways you go about like bringing people who don't necessarily like listen to jazz or don't even listen to music deeply? How do you bring them into what you're doing?
Let me ask you this though. Do you think that was a problem
No.
50 years ago?
It wasn't.
Do you think it was a problem 30 years ago? Do you think it was a problem 20 years ago?
Kind of.
Oh.
So you're saying it's my fault?
I don't. It's my fault. I'm older than you. It's definitely my fault. No, this is the thing that that's the wrong question, because it already has embedded in it an assumption that people don't understand you, and then that basically you're accepting that, you know, before you even ask the question, and that you don't need to accept that. For one thing, what can you learn about how music works that will help you communicate, you know? And for me, the way that's happened for me the most is by collaborating with non-musicians, collaborating with poets and dancers and theater artists and filmmakers and anybody who doesn't give a shit about the chords, the notes, the song, like any, you know, really they respond to the energy, to the emotion. That's it, you know. And they'll make some poetic kind of association, like, oh, well, this makes me feel like I'm driving on the freeway, or something like that. You know, stuff that's not even, stuff we never even would think to say, you know. So it's that kind of thing that helps you get outside of the mechanics of the music and into this sort of like, oh yeah, this is what this is for in the first place, right? So it's partly that kind of like, it's not about bringing people to us, it's about us going to them. That's basically what it is.
Yeah, and you have to consider those contexts that you want to engage in, you know. So, like say, like I just really just follow my instinct about what I'm interested in, and I'm really boring with following that, but it leads me to interesting places. So I used to be a skateboarder, right? So, well, I love skating. Every time I go to San Francisco, I love watching people skate. Well, why not right here? Let's put a ramp right here. So at SF Jazz, we brought a ramp in, put it right here. 10 skateboarders, some great skaters in the Bay Area, and we just played. It was just a jam session. The audience showed up, but you know what the audience was? It was like old skaters that like jazz and their kids. You know? And their kids. So all of a sudden it was like, oh, I can finally take my children to a gig. You know, can hear the bandwagon and watch like some skaters skate for an hour and a half and be satisfied with everything that's happening, you know? So like sometimes it's, you know, in this way of marrying traditions, I generally think that is helpful. Marrying dance tradition and jazz tradition, you know. I mean, I asked you that part about when do you think there was a moment in time where it really kind of severed itself, its tie? Only just as a way that you would think about history, but I don't. But in his way of answering that that's people listen all over the world, so it's not about them. It's not as complex as you think it is, you know. You play the trumpet. You actually we play the piano. You play the trumpet. You could walk outside, down the street, all day, every day, and play your horn to more people than would ever come to see you if you had a band gig somewhere. I mean, hopefully that will change, right? But you have the power to do that. You have a mobile instrument. I'm always jealous of people. Now, would I do that if I played trumpet? Probably not. But I'm jealous. I'm jealous that you have that opportunity, though. Huh? Some other guy does that. So you know what I mean? So I mean, and once you start to play, you'll see it more. Someone will come up to him and say, I've never been to a jazz concert before. It's inevitable. It's gonna happen to you. And I want you to remember this day. I've never been to a jazz concert before. I didn't want to come. And they're going to tell you this. And I heard this music, and if jazz concerts are like this, I'm ready to go all the time.
Yeah. That happens, actually.
A
that
lot.
happens to me more often than any kind of
A
jazz
lot.
listener
A
would say.
lot. You would be surprised.
Yeah.
So it's, it's not as dire as you think it is. But you do have to be honest with yourself when you then play, so that people understand that. They feel that when you play. Whether they understand all of your language or not. That's why this music can go all the way around the globe. And then we can go to a jam session and just, I don't even know you. Come sit in with you. That's amazing. That's unbelievable freedom that we have, and the kind of shared language that we have. So it's everywhere. So use that as a resource, to propel you into some other way of communicating with your audience. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I have actually a question for Vijay. You mentioned in the beginning that you were in a situation in which you listened to coding. You said, well, we wouldn't sound it in 1,000 years even if we try, so why wouldn't we try? I remember the other day listening to a guitar player which he played with Bessie.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the very same thoughts, but it's very different than what I usually listen to, and very, very different than the way I play. And I say, like, how does it play like that? Like, I would never sound like that. And then when you said it, I was wondering, when you went into these specific situations, what steps you're taking, or what are you doing in order to shape your playing a little bit differently to this recording that you're listening to?
It can be a lot of things. I mean, I really just think about formative listening moments I've had where suddenly I'm like, oh, I don't know what music is anymore. Like, what just happened? That kind of thing. And then what does that do to me? It's sort of hard. It's more of an energy, I think, that sort of like impels me, like, oh my God, I don't know anything. Let me start over, that kind of thing. So there's partly that. It's kind of like, it's almost like adrenaline or some sort of survival instinct. Like, whoa, I've been missing out on something. Like, what the heck, that kind of thing. So that is one sort of source for me. And then it's not really like, there's no clear way that then turns into material for me. But I guess what I've always done as a composer is create, I guess for lack of a better word, etudes for myself. And I think of Giant Steps as an example, like for Coltrane. Which isn't to say it's not music, but there's something in it that's like, whoa, that's really impossible. Like at some point it was impossible to play, right? And then he worked through it, and then it was, something was possible because of working through something that had that sort of level of resistance. It's like, whoa, you have to come up, you have to summon some other resources to just be able to navigate it, So a lot of it is like that, like just setting challenges for myself. And they might be inspired by something I hear. They might be inspired by something I'm thinking about. It might even just be another person, like working with another person who is coming from a very different place or a different sensibility or something, that then kind of like draws something out of me that I might not have found otherwise, So there are a lot of different tactics, but I guess what it basically comes down to is some boundary between what you think you are and whatever is not that. And then sort of trying to like reach across it.
Do you think there's a way that you can actively work on the synchronicity of your mind and body to transcend like your emotions through the sound?
Say that again, because that was a deep sentence and I got kind of like carried away with each word, so I just want to hear it again.
Do you think there's a way that you can actively work on the synchronicity between your mind and body to just create sound, propelling your emotions through just sound in just an active way?
Did he just define music for us? I think you did. Say that again, one more time. I'm serious.
You're making it so hard.
No, I'm serious. Just say it again.
Is there a way that you can actively work on synchronicity of your mind and body to just like propel emotions through sounds?
Yeah.
Yeah. Play.
It's called music. I mean, I'm serious. Like, that is music. That's what music is, isn't it? It has to be.
You know, you're 18 now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it's going to hit you in a few years. You're going to be playing, and it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. And then you'll know. You will know. And then you'll always crave that feeling. And you will work as hard as you possibly can to get that feeling. It will hit you. I remember when it hit me when I was in college playing with these. They weren't even great, but we were trying to play this like train-like thing, and we hit this tone after about an hour. Eric Harlan was playing with us. We hit this tone, and everybody just burst into tears. The whole room. It was like 6 of us in the room, and we all lost it. Like after about an hour and a half of playing this one thing, we lost it. And that's when you know, like, oh, all right, this is, oh, that's the best drug in the world. Like this feeling where it just, and you work to try to figure out the techniques that continue to let you do that. So it comes more frequently rather than once every 10 years.
Yeah, so is that just the process, you just have to play a lot to learn how to do that?
You won't,
Every time,
yeah, you won't be learning it. It'll happen to you. You'll be changing. 'Cause you won't be the same person in a year, you know, or 6 months ago when I met you the first time. It's like you just keep shifting, you know. Everybody keeps shifting. So your perspective on everything you touch and start to play will change. And then you have children. And that changes even more. Yeah, last question. Yeah, go ahead.
When you were both our age, relatively college age, what steps did you both take towards honesty, towards finding your own voice on the instrument and a position as a composer, or did you?
I found a girlfriend who became my wife. That's honest. I found a partner who was going to be honest with me about myself. That's when I learned a lot about my music. It wasn't my Jackie Bayard, it was like my lover.
I can't top that, damn. I was going to mention a couple of books, but no. I mean, I didn't go to music school. I didn't even know, when I was your age, I didn't know I would ever be an artist.
That's deep.
I'm serious. I didn't know that I could. I didn't know the world would let me. I didn't know if I was good enough. But I didn't know if I had anything to offer. I didn't know. I didn't have any clue. So, you guys are lucky.
But when you did, and at some point, I mean, am I correct in understanding that you were like thinking of honesty, like thinking of like one day I'll have my own voice, one day I'll be original?
I'm not sure it even works like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think,
Did you ask Rand Blake this question ever?
I know, really.
It's like a real original. It's like a really true one. It's like already here. Yeah, I don't know if it works like that. Step. I think you just live a little bit more, and you'll feel differently about the people you hang out with and your teachers as you grow older. I just think it all just changes as you mature.
I will say this, probably what set me up the best for kind of like just being I don't know, when was I not myself? I was always myself, but in the sense of like basically not trying to sound like anybody else. I guess I'll put it that way. Is some sort of set of like critical thinking tools, which aren't even specific to music. Actually, I mean, I will say it was about reading a lot of books that sort of cracked my head open about like, oh, all this stuff that people say is true. Truth is kind of something that has been put in place by power in culture. All right, so that started to think like that about like, well, okay, you tell me that that's true, but I want to make sure it's true. So then I started just questioning everything that I received. Like, no received wisdom went unturned, all right? Including like a G minor 7 voicing. Like, I don't care if someone else did that. What is it to me? Why should I do it, So basically that kind of stuff. It's sort of like, well, why don't I get my own G minor 7 voicing? Why not?
Don't you want to know what his voicing is? I'm curious.
Well, I guess the point is like, then I got into this frame of mind where it's not a voicing. It's a process of generating voices, for example, or generating sounds. So then it's not ever about fixing my vocabulary. Really, it's about trying to always be creating.
We'll play something about 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm.